We're going to replace the AC compressor in this '04 Toyota Sienna. So your car is making this screeching sound that only comes on when the AC is on. And then your significant other tells you it's embarrassing to drive the car this way. And then all of a sudden you're driving down the road and the noise is gone. And the battery light comes on in the dashboard. You go take a look at the engine and you see that the belt is missing. Then you know it's time to replace the AC compressor. Fortunately, in this case, what failed was the pulley bearing, so the compressor did not fail on the inside of the system. So I did not have to flush and clean my lines and the other AC parts, as would be the case if the compressor would send metal shavings from its internals to the other components of the AC system. In this video, I'm only going to have images, as I'm limited with time, but I do try to go through the important tips, so pay attention to what I say. But if I miss something, or you have a question on any part of the project, please ask me below. Please subscribe so I'll be more motivated to make more repair videos with these great tips. Enough chit chat. Let's see what it's about. Before starting this repair, you have to recover the refrigerant in the system. It is illegal to vent it into the air, as it's very bad for the environment. Most shops will evacuate your system for a small fee. First, we're going to start by disconnecting the battery so we don't short out the alternator cable. Next, disconnect the upper radiator hose from the radiator. Move the hose out of the way. It gives you a lot more room to work. You might lose a small amount of antifreeze. Now we remove the two electrical connectors from the alternator. One is a cable with a 10mm nut under this rubber cover, and the other is a harness clip connection that you press firmly on the side closer to the exhaust shield. It's a bit easier to unclip if you actually slide the rubber out of the way. Next, we will remove the belt that runs the alternator and compressor. In this car, the alternator pivots, and that's what sets the tension on the belt. To remove the belt, you need to loosen the top alternator bolt just a few turns for now. It's a 14mm. And then loosen the lower mounting bolt also a few turns. It's a 12mm. And then you get slack on the belt by loosening the long bolt. It's a 12mm that attaches a bracket to the lower part of the alternator. This will allow the alternator to pivot down and put slack on the belt. If the alternator doesn't pivot by itself, sometimes you have to help it by pushing or prying the front of the alternator downward. Remove the belt from the car. Inspect it. If it's cracked or very soft, it's a good opportunity to get a new one. Next, we will remove the alternator. Now we will completely remove the two mounting bolts that we loosened earlier. The alternator might be a little stiff where the long bolt was, as there's a little sleeve on the alternator that tightens on the engine when you tighten the bolt. So you will have to pry the alternator away from the engine. Rocking it back and forward helps, especially if you can do it while prying. Here's our compressor. We need to remove the bracket that holds it on the side. There are two nuts on the back. They are 14mm, one above the other. And then there is one bolt in the front. It's a 12mm. In order to remove the bracket, you need to remove the electrical wires that are clipped and attached to it. First, we will remove the plug connector to the compressor. It has a little tab you press on and detach the plug. Make sure you pull on the plastic connectors and not on the wire, as it could break. Next, there is a 10mm bolt that holds the wires in place with a little bracket. It sits in between the two 14mm nuts we removed earlier. And also there's a little clip that holds the wires in the front. Remove that by pushing on the little tab with a small flathead screwdriver, and it should slip out of the bracket. Now you can set the wires out of the way. Next, we remove the two nuts holding the AC lines to the compressor. They are 10mm. The lines should come right out. Move them out of the way. Be mindful that dirt doesn't get into them. Next, we remove the four bolts that hold the compressor in place. They are 12mm. There are two on top and two on the bottom. The bottom ones you can't really see, but you can feel them. See where they are located by looking at the new compressor. There's also a bracket that is held in by the two bolts that are on the left here. Now the compressor should easily come out from the top. You'll probably have some oil in the compressor, so try not to turn it too much while removing it. Now we can compare our old and new compressor. Make sure they look the same. My clutch was designed a little differently, but the compressor body and plug were the same. Now we want to measure the amount of oil in the old compressor, and try to have about the same in the new one. You want to tip the compressor over so the ports are facing down, and use a disposable cup or a measuring cup to catch the oil, so you can see how much there was. It helps to turn the pulley clutch while draining the oil to remove any oil trapped inside. You want to use something like a block of wood to hold the compressor up above the measuring cup, as the compressor is pretty heavy. There's also an oil drain plug on the bottom, and some oil will come out of there. Remove that after draining the other holes, so it's easier to control the fluid coming out. Most new or remanufactured compressors come with some oil in them. Some actually come with more than you need, so you need to drain that as well into a clean cup and see how much of it needs to go back in the system, or if you need to add some. If no oil comes out of the old compressor, I would put 2 or 3 ounces in the new one, as most likely the oil leaked out over time. The compressor is made in a way that it needs to hold some oil, so it shouldn't be empty and get damaged. Make sure to use the correct type of oil. Most systems use PAG 46. Now we can install the new compressor. Don't forget the bracket that goes in with the bolts. Remove the old O-rings from the lines. You should have got replacement O-rings with the compressor. And even if you did, make sure you got the correct ones. They should be the same size and thickness as the original ones. Pour oil on the new O-rings. That will help them get a good seal. Next, install the lines. The bolts or nuts for the lines should be on pretty tight, but be careful not to ruin the threads by over-tightening, as it's aluminum, and aluminum threads are not very strong. I would guess around 15 to 20 foot-pounds. Next, install the large bracket. It's important that you don't tighten the bolts and nuts for this bracket until after you have the alternator bolted back in place, just before you install the belt. Because if you tighten the bracket before mounting the alternator will not line up with its mounting holes. Next, install the wire bracket with the 10mm bolt. Now clip the electrical connector to the compressor. Install the alternator. It's easier to start with the upper bolt, and then install the lower bolt. You'll need to pivot the alternator to find the mounting holes on the bottom. Now that the alternator is set in place, you can tighten down the large bracket with the bolt and 2 nuts on the bottom. It's a little hard to get to, but it's not too hard to get a wrench in there. Install the belt and set the tension. The correct tension is when you can twist the belt a quarter turn, but it's pretty hard to do so. Tighten the alternator bolts, and then reattach the radiator hose, and top off the car with the correct antifreeze. Now you have to attach a vacuum pump to the AC lines to get all the air out of the system. You can rent these pumps and a set of gauges at AutoZone. There should be a sticker on the car stating how much refrigerant the car needs. Mine needed 1.8 pounds. If you're not sure how to properly vacuum and charge the system, I recommend going to a shop for that part. Many shops have specials where it's not too expensive, and it's important to have it done properly. You're done. Sit in the car and enjoy the cold air. You may sit in there as long as you'd like. You've earned it. You're done. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and leave me comments below.